take your national insurance number away. They get rid of your driving licence. All your bank details are erased. They just vanish you. And if I tell you my name's Fred Bloggs, you believe me. You don't say, well, let me see your driving licence, Fred.
They took me down to Chelmsford police station. All the way there, and when we arrived, I kept looking out for Jim. I kept expecting him to pop up at any moment and say, no, this one's okay. He's on our side. I was sure this was all down to him. They had finally swooped, and the reason I'd been arrested was to stop Mick and Jack from suspecting that I'd grassed them up. They let Colin go home after a couple of hours. They realised he had nothing to do with anything illegal, but he wasn't allowed to make any phone calls or see anyone for ages. They interviewed me for the first time just before 11:30 p.m, and they were asking me loads of questions about the cannabis that they'd found in my van and where it had come from. I was just going no comment to the whole lot, no matter what they said. I'd only been selling the drugs because Jim had told me to keep him with Mick. In my mind at least, I hadn't done anything wrong. I was sure it was all going to be fine. But then, they played their trump card. Essex Police. Record of tape recorded interview. Chelmsford Police Station. The 13th of the 5th, 96. The time, 23:26 hours. Detective Constable Winston. We believe that you were in convoy today, and you were playing an active part in the transportation of 10 kilos of cannabis resin, and you were being asked to make some form of comment about that. Do you wish to say anything at this time? No comment. I draw your attention to the fact that if you refuse to answer this question, it may affect any answers you give at your trial. Do you understand that? No comment. Right. And lastly, that a record is being made, as I've said, of this tape, and should you later be prosecuted, this will be brought up at your trial. Do you understand that? No comment. Right, okay. Well, if that is it, you've got the notice. I don't intend to say any more about the possession with intent to supply at the moment. The time by my watch now is 23:35 hours, and you're now going to be arrested for being involved in the murder of Pat Tate, Craig Rolfe, and Tony Tucker. Do you wish to make any comment to the fact you've now been arrested for that murder? No comment. They were trying to gauge a reaction, and I didn't make one. But as soon as they switched the tape off, I went mad. What the fuck do you think you're doing? Arresting me for that? I said. This is my worst nightmare coming true. And where the fuck was Jim? The following day, the evidence against him was starting to mount up. Nicholls was beginning to realise how hopeless his situation was. In addition to all the police and customs surveillance records, which now included still photos and video footage, the police also had access to phone records of both Nicholls and Steele. Again, Nicholls took the no comment road, but it was obvious it was being backed into a corner. In fact, with neither Steele or Womans being caught in possession of drugs, there was more evidence against him than anyone else. And then, once again, just when things were looking at their bleakest, they got even worse. Just to put it in a nutshell here, Darren, what we're actually saying is there's been a large importation of cannabis resin to the country. You've now been shown to be very privy immediately before this importation came about by your association with Steele and the others. You have now subsequently, in the very early hours of the next morning, been involved directly in the importation of these drugs. Your vehicle has subsequently been forensically examined, and there is salt water and a large amount of sand consistent with having been on the beach consistent with the importation taking place. You have been shown by surveillance to have been involved in the collection of a consignment of 10 kilos of cannabis resin. As far as I'm concerned, you're a large player in the ongoings that have happened. You were so concerned at the time you were being stopped that your first thought was to try to tell Mr. Steele that it had all come on top as far as you were concerned. I feel in the light of this summary, you should reconsider your situation. I want you to understand the enormity of what I'm saying to you. Do you understand that? No comment. Fine. Now, I have here a copy of your custody record from last night. The entry is timed at 21:16. It says, while carrying out the review, Mr. Nicholls asked if he could speak to a nominated police officer known to him. I passed this to Superintendent Story, who declined this, and Nicholls was informed of the above. Would you like to make any comment about that? No comment. Would you like to tell me who the police officer was that you wished to have some dialogue with at the time? No comment. Alright. Well, I can tell you at this moment, 2 police officers from Essex have been arrested and are currently in custody. Fuck. I don't fucking believe it. The officers have been charged with a number of offences, including some linked to the possession of controlled drugs. We have evidence that you have had numerous dealings with one of these officers. Is there any comments you wish to make now? No. No fucking comment. As soon as the interview was over, Nicholls asked to see the most senior officer available. What happened next was recorded by DC Winston in his pocketbook. I was in the company with Detective Superintendent Barrington when we spoke to Darren Nicholls in an interview room. Nicholls had signed the custody record to be seen without a solicitor. This meeting had been requested by Mr. Nicholls, who was introduced to Mr. Barrington. Nicholls asked Mr. Barrington if he named the arrested police officer, would he confirm it? Mr. Barrington agreed. Mr. Nicholls said, "Is it DC Jim?" Mr. Barrington confirmed this, and then he, Nicholls, went on to say this is how he'd gotten into trouble, and wanted to say how he'd been set up. Mr. Barrington explained that regardless of what information Mr. Nicholls gave, that he would be responsible and would have to accept any sentence passed on him by the legal system. Mr. Nicholls accepted this and asked about what protection would be given to him and his family. Mr. Barrington said Mr. Nicholls must be totally honest and all details given so that an accurate judgment could be made regarding the level of protection offered. Mr. Nicholls asked about protection in prison and was told about the system of protection that was available for registered informants. Mr. Nicholls said that he would be given information regarding the legal activities of policemen and said he did not say anything to DC Winston because he did not know if he could trust him. Mr. Barrington said that Mr. Nicholls could trust him fully and that he should tell him the whole truth of what his involvement was. Mr. Nicholls stated that he was a registered informant of DC Jim. Mr. Barrington acknowledged this by stating that he knew all about that and that he had sanctioned the payment to him and that DC Winston had no involvement with DC Jim at all. Mr. Nicholls said that for the last 6 months he felt he was being used and that the drugs job was not his main concern and that other serious things would be disclosed. I knew I didn't have any choice. I tried to put myself in Mick and Jack's shoes, to wonder what was going through their minds, and pretty soon I realised I was totally fucked. 2 days earlier, Jack had threatened to kill me. The next day he gets arrested. In Mick's case, I came round to collect some drugs, and an hour later, he gets arrested. It was a good bet by now that I've also been told that a couple of policemen had been nicked, and I was talking to one of them. It wouldn't take them long to put 2 and 2 together, and even if they didn't work out I was given information about the smuggling side of things, I was still the weak link in the murder case. And now the cops were talking about remanding me in custody in Chelmsford Prison. That's exactly where they were going to put Mick and Jack and the others. I wouldn't last 5 minutes. It was time to start talking. I don't know what I was expecting. Joining the witness protection program, becoming a supergrass, it all sounded quite glamorous and exciting. The truth is, it's nothing of the sort. A couple of days after I'd agreed to cooperate, I was taken out of my cell into a little interview room and had this little sheet of paper shoved in front of me. It had my full name at the top and the list of conditions I had to agree to. The first was I had to promise to plead guilty to 3 offences: possession of 10 kilos of cannabis, supplying a firearm to a prohibited person, and conspiracy to import drugs. The gun and the conspiracy charges really pissed me off. I'd never been caught doing either, and there was no real evidence that I'd been involved at all. I was only being charged because I had admitted to them. But this was part of the deal. I had to admit to everything that I'd ever done. Being honest meant that if it all went pear-shaped, I was risking a sentence of at least double that I would have got for the drugs alone. The next condition was that I had to agree to attend court and testify in all cases involving Worms, Steele and Corey. The next paragraph was about what the police were going to do for me. I started to concentrate really hard because I was keen to find out exactly what they said. But as I started reading, I realised they really weren't saying anything. They promised to provide me with a new name and new identity, and then to put me back in the position I was before my arrest. I remember I called one of the cops and pointed to the last condition. Does this mean you're going to stick me in a battered old Jag with 10 kilos of puff in the back? He didn't find it funny. I asked about my council house. I'd been living there for 5 years. I'd earned a nice discount. I was thinking of trying to buy it. Would they be able to arrange for me to get the same discount once I moved? The answer was no. Okay, would they be able to help me get a job? The answer was maybe. It was all very vague, nothing specific. They explained that it had to be like that, because if there was anything in the contract that was rock solid, it might be deemed as an inducement to me testifying. So that was it. 1.5 sides of A4, a couple of signatures, and then nothing to do but start telling everything that I knew, and then wait to see if I could trust them. Once I decided to cooperate and tell everything I knew, the police didn't seem to know what to do with me. They were holding me in the female cell unit at Chelmsford police station for ages, but they had armed guards at the entrance in case anyone tried to get to me. That made it bloody obvious to every visiting solicitor and prisoner that something special was going on. Eventually they moved me to Colchester and kept the whole thing on a much lower profile. Because I was just in a police station rather than a proper prison, they didn't have any of the proper facilities. For months I was still under caution, and all I was doing was making statements about the murders and the drugs. It meant I couldn't really have any visitors or talk to anyone about anything, so I quickly started to get really bored. They gave me a TV and a fridge, and I got Sandra to send over a video recorder and a Nintendo game system. Food was the biggest problem. There was no canteen at the Nick, so they had to send out for pizza or McDonald's or KFC. As for hot drinks, all they had was these prepaid vending machines that makes everything taste like water, with a little bit of dirt floating in it. The only thing I could bear was the hot chocolate, so whenever they used to offer me something, I used to go for that. I thought I'd stay there in the police cells until the trial, but then, once the statements were over, they said I had to go to prison. At first, I was terrified. I was sure I'd be attacked and killed within a few days, but then they explained there was somewhere very special, somewhere very safe, just for people like me. It sounded dreadful. They told me everything was secret, but the first day I got there, everyone was saying to me, "Oi, you're that geezer who grassed up them blokes over the triple murder, ain't ya?" Then they all sat around me like it was in a fucking listen with mother, wanted to know all the details. At first they didn't want to say anything. I didn't know who any of these people were, and it really pissed me off they knew all about me. But after a while I started getting into it. You had to. You do feel like you're part of a special club, and sitting around with everyone, chatting about what you have and haven't done is all part of the fun. It's also a club where you get to call each other names that in any other prison you get your face smashed in. There is one joke you hear in the unit at least 10 times a day, and even then, we still all laugh. It happens when someone asks to borrow some milk or cigarettes, and promise to pay other people back. "How can I trust you?" someone will say. "You're a fucking grass." It was no Hollandsey Bay, but it was good fun at times. It wasn't all laughs though. I know that prison is not supposed to be a holiday camp, but the simple truth is, though we are at least partly supposed to be good guys, doing the decent thing and all that, we actually got treated far worse than any other prisoners. We had to cook all our own food because they didn't trust anyone else to cook it for us, just in case someone tried to poison someone. That's all very well in principle, but we only got the same food budget as other inmates. It works fine if you're buying stuff in bulk, but when you're only shopping for 12, it doesn't go very far at all. We also spent a lot of time locked in our cells, just to make things easier when they were changing shifts. They started locking us up about 7:30 PM, whereas the rest of the prison were not going back in their cells to at least another hour. We couldn't get any education or special activities because there wasn't enough of us. We couldn't use the rest of the exercise facilities in case we got attacked, so we had to make do with some really second-hand equipment. The funny thing was, they had all these measures to stop people getting to us, but all anyone had to do was turn up during visiting time and just walk straight in. Because we were supposed to be a secret, and no one knew which prison we were being kept in, The idea was only visitors and new people in the unit would ever turn up. So rather than being searched or having to provide identification like other visitors, all my friends and family had to do was turn up at the front gate, say Blogs 19, and they'd be walked straight through. The security was also pretty lax during visits to the unit itself. We didn't have a proper visiting room, so people just used to come into the main unit and hang about on the landing. We were not supposed to go into our cells, but no one ever paid attention to that, and people just got up to all sorts. They finally tightened it up when one of the inmates, Ethan, got his girlfriend pregnant during one of her visits. He obviously didn't have any money he could give to her, so she tried suing the governor, saying it was his fault for letting her into Ethan's cell unsupervised. They say prisons are universities of crime. If that's true, some of the people in the Blogs unit were studying for their PhDs. A couple of the drug smugglers I was in there with had actually done it all on purpose. They knew it was all coming on top for the gang, so one of them had volunteered to turn grass, give some evidence against a couple of the others to take the heat off the main operation. They got a reduced sentence. A couple of nobodies go away for decades, and the drugs still keep on coming in. These guys had so much money it was untrue. I remember once one of them was looking through some car magazines, and he started asking me about what car he should get his wife. The choice was between a brand new Mercedes or a Porsche. There was another guy, a chemist, who'd been making amphetamine and ecstasy for a big North London criminal gang. He had made millions. He'd actually bought an island. He showed us some pictures of it, along with his houses, boats and aeroplanes. He had so much money that he used to pay people £10,000 a time just to leave the country with a suitcase full of money to take to Switzerland and pay into his private account. I learned a lot from my time being in the Blogs unit, but the main thing I was told was never to trust the police. The other people that were there, some of them had been stitched up really badly. I'd find myself talking to people who'd been in the unit for 5 years. They would tell me what the police had said to them at the start, and I'd realise it was exactly the same thing that the police had told me a couple of days earlier. One guy, Paul, who'd been serving 15 years, his story scared me the most. I remember him telling me not to trust the police. Right now, he said, they need you. They really need you. Believe me, Darren, they'll treat you like a god, right up until the day of the verdict, then they drop you like a stone. Paul had good reason to be bitter. He'd been on remand in another prison after being caught with a gang of armed robbers in Ireland. He'd been a bit of a weak link, but was happy to keep his mouth shut and do his time. His mates didn't believe it though, and had arranged to have him killed. One day, while he was out in the exercise yard, he was told to go towards the wall because he was going to be helped to escape. As he made his way over, something told him it wasn't right. He decided to follow his hunch and went straight back inside and was asked to be put into isolation. He soon found out that he was actually being set up to be shot. He turned supergrass the very next day. When it came to the trial, the police had done a shit job of gathering evidence and everyone had just got off. They'd only left Paul, and because he had admitted all this stuff that he hadn't been involved in, the judge gave him 15 years. I couldn't believe it. I wanted to cry for him. Not only that, it made me think I'd made the biggest mistake of my life by joining the scheme and agreeing to give evidence. But by then, it was too late. If Mick and Jack got off, then the judge might decide it was because I didn't do a good enough job and decide to sentence me to the full amount for the drugs, the guns, everything. For the first time, I realised that I could get 10 years, while Mick and Jack would both walk free.